I started to dive into all the ways dyslexia impacts my life in my video about books a couple months back. To summarize, I'm only now realizing that I don't enjoy reading as much as others because my brain has to work extra hard to make sense of the words on the page. It's hard to describe exactly what's going on, but everything just kinda looks jumbled. There are plenty of artistic interpretations of this that get the idea of what I'm experiencing across pretty well, but that got me wondering, what would a dyslexic audiobook sound like? Not a dyslexic person reading aloud, what do I hear going on in my brain when I try to read? In a hole filled in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of nothing, the ends of
worms and an oozy smell.
A dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing to sit in it or down to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means a round door like a pothole painted green with a shiny brass knob in the very middle. Yep, now try processing an entire 600-page textbook like that. The very basic definition of dyslexia, according to the National Institutes of Health, is a learning disability that impairs a person's ability to read. Common characteristics include phonological processing, the manipulation of sounds, spelling, rapid visual verbal responding. I left lots of links in the description below going more into exactly what dyslexia is. Just for this video, I'm focused more on my personal relationship to it. I've spent the last few months using some of those resources to try to make sense of it within myself. Yeah, f***ing right. Okay, I should rephrase. I've spent the last few months watching videos on dyslexia trying to make sense of it within myself. Now, admittedly, I was stretching it a little bit in my last video when I said, how did I go 28 years of my life without knowing this? For a while now, say high school and onward, I've known that I've had trouble reading in ways that were consistent with what I knew about dyslexia at the time. Reading aloud made those troubles especially apparent by me reading words from different lines of text, taking a long time to sound out words that I didn't already know, or just saying them completely wrong, or needing to take very long pauses in between lines to process what I was reading before I said it out loud in order to avoid feeling embarrassed by the previous two things. I did always kind of know that I was dyslexic, but I always labeled it in more of like an anecdotal way. Like the same way someone might say,
I just have to straighten it. My OCD is kicking in.
Even though OCD is a far more complex neurological condition. For me though, turns out when I was reading something aloud, audibly make a mistake, and I would say, must be my dyslexia kicking in, I was correct. At least I think so. I've taken enough self-evaluations online for it to be apparent that my experience is straight up consistent with that of dyslexia. From there, the evaluation informed me that speaking to a specialist for a formal diagnosis is recommended. So that's what I'm here to do today. It's time I know once and for all, without a doubt, if I have dyslexia or not. I'm about to call a specialist in my area and begin the process and see where it goes from there. Okay, here we go. I don't know why I'm a little nervous. Hello, yes, I would like one formal adult dyslexia evaluation, please. There, how much money? It's not covered by insurance. A formal dyslexia diagnosis isn't going to do much for me anyway. Okay, thank you. You've been a great help. Thank you. All right, have a great day. All right, you too. All right, goodbye. Goodbye. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. He hung up on me. So I guess a formal diagnosis isn't exactly happening, which I'm mostly alright with, but I just really wanted someone that I could ask questions to. If I can't get a formal diagnosis anytime soon, I at least have questions about navigating this discovery that my brain works a little differently than others. Someone who can walk me through the nuanced layers of self-diagnosis. Someone whose passion in life lies in helping others understand neurodivergence.
Did someone say neurodivergence?
Hey.
Hi.
Tell the folks at home what your, little bit about your background and kind of your research interests and whatnot, and, overall why I have chosen you, of all people, to have this conversation with.
Well, I am your wife,
Hey, wife.
Hey! Long time no see.
I love you, wife.
I love you, wife.
I love you, wife.
My name is Robin. I live here, and I have a fair amount of lived experience being neurodivergent, and by a fair amount, I mean for as long as I have been existent. And I am currently about to go back to school for my master's at Johns Hopkins, where I will be doing research primarily for autism and ADHD, but I'm going to be doing research working with improving mostly physical and mental health of neurodivergent communities, especially adult communities who tend not to get a lot of resources. We are kind of at an interesting point in time, I think, where a lot of us are kind of having this realization that, oh wait, we're maybe not weird or malfunctioning. Maybe we just have a different brain from the average human. And I think a lot of people are finding comfort and finding community. Just having names for things like this is still so new, and really thinking of them in terms of how can we help people is even newer, I think, in that context.
So how do I cure my dyslexia and read like a normal person?
I feel like Gwyneth Paltrow probably has something for that. A lot of people have this fallacy that certain things, you know, like dyslexia, ADHD, autism can be cured, or you might be able to do things to prevent it. Pretty much all contemporary research shows that, you know, these are things that we're born with. They're things typically passed on genetically. Oftentimes, if you are neurodivergent, someone else in your family is neurodivergent. And it's just something that, you know, you can learn to live with. You can make your life better. You can work with these parts of you and have a really full, fulfilling, vibrant life, but it's not something that's just gonna go away. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So how has dyslexia looked for you up until this point?
Well,
Question number 1 should be, did you just gloss over the instructions because they looked long and complicated and difficult to read? We're gonna go with below average. I misspell things all the time, so we're gonna say, but I'm not that, I don't know, yeah, 3. Okay, so just for the sake of this test, let's say that magazines are web articles, and we're gonna go with irregularly. Do you read daily newspaper? Again, for the sake of updating these questions for 2023 and a millennial type, we're gonna go with, do I read online newspaper publications? And that's gonna be a never. Okay, rarely. Help from friends. You know what that would require? I mean, I'm trying to answer this as honestly as I can, but like all these things are so elementary based, and like I was fine, like kindergarten to 3rd grade. It was in like later elementary school, middle and high school and college that I faced the most negative repercussions of having a lesser ability to read. Yeah, more than most. I got fine grades in English classes because I was a good writer, but like every book that we read, it was Spark Notes for me, or watched the movie first. What is your current attitude towards reading? It's like, you know, I like books. I like the idea of books. I want to read more books. I have a good attitude towards reading. I just don't like doing it. I mean, all my reading right now is for pleasure. I just don't do a lot of pleasurable reading. So, again, just some. Like, would this change like anything? Like, it's still saying significant risk.
my inner narrative centered more around just, I'm bad at reading, period. I'm not smart,
period. Like, it's my fault that I'm not passionate enough about reading to be more into it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Looking back on everything, I think I turned out pretty okay. Like, I'm not suffering right now in my life due to my shortcomings in school.
But that is definitely something that hindered you quite a bit and had the potential probably to make things very difficult. Do you think you would have had a better experience had you known and had you been able to advocate for yourself?
When I was in 8th grade, I stopped caring about school for quite a bit. That was my worst year academically by far. I was just like, screw it. I don't care anymore. School sucks. I'm bad at everything. No point in trying. And my grades got so bad that I was deemed ineligible for after-school activities. That notice that I was ineligible hit my desk probably like 3 days before opening night of the musical. Not that I was like any big part or anything. I was just a background cast member, but it was being around a production like that, being around, storytelling and actors and creativity and, just the teamwork and camaraderie it takes to like put something like that together was the only thing that made sense to me at that time. I don't know what compelled me to do this, but I went to my principal saying like, hey, with all due respect, I'm sorry I screwed this up. I'm sorry that I, didn't try as hard. Will you let me back into the musical? She took me into the hall. Don't remember what exactly the flow of all this was, but she was like, let's ask one of your teachers. Hey, Mr. How was David's performance in your social studies class? And, the words that I remember are like, David is one of my laziest students. His head is in the clouds, like, the entirety of, during my class. And his overall attitude just being angry, disapproving, upset, almost like someone's got to lay down the law to this kid kind of thing. To, which my principal's response was, well, there you have it. No, you can't go back to the musical. And from there on out, I did take more responsibility over my schoolwork. But it put all the blame and responsibility on me.
A child.
Not like once did anybody say like, what do you need? Or not even what do you need, like, what's going on? I think that experience has had ripple effects through my entire life. I mean, that experience is the most extreme illustration of the cause and effects of dyslexia in my life, or more importantly, the cause and effects of not having any support, no intervention, no understanding of what it was that I was going through. And it really took me into my early 20s, like after graduating through any educational institute, to believe things about myself of like, I am smart. I am capable of learning things if given a different way to learn them.
I'm curious to know what you've learned about what dyslexia actually is, and what parts of your life you never really even thought of as an aspect of dyslexia that now in retrospect you can piece together.
Dyslexia really has far less to do with the act of reading and more just being able to comprehend something as a whole rather than the small little parts. Dyslexic folks tend to be like big picture thinkers. Some words that have come up for me that resonate with me, you know, when I'm feeling good about myself is like a creative, a strong leader, intuitive, empathetic, a lot of the parts of the brain that require you to put like 2 and 2 together, or like 2 and 2 and 2 together, like, you know, to come to a final conclusion. All the positives I see are like under a resume would be listed as like soft skills. And I think dyslexia comes in the way of me gaining more of those like hard skills that you need like degrees for, and like all this like comprehension of like these complex things. I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I don't think I've ever actually heard you phrase it in that way before.
I have been really curious to see if there are any accommodations that I can make for myself. What are your thoughts on people taking charge of their own accommodations?
As much as I think that having a formal diagnosis can be really beneficial, especially if you're someone who needs medication or other more structural resources, if they are available, I think that's really great. I think it's really good for the medical community to get better at diagnosing, but just the way things are right now, we really do live in a world where at some point your lived experience and your ability to understand criteria for diagnosis can often surpass the understanding of, you know, trained medical professionals. I don't want to say that as a blanket statement. I don't want to say that in the sense of, you know, everyone diagnose yourself with whatever, because that's not the case. But if you find these things are helpful for you, if you find accommodations are helpful, if you find community helpful, I think that's a really great thing. And of course, what we should be doing is making diagnosis more accessible and more accurate. But until that happens, I think having self-diagnosis is the best we can do. And I think that's a great thing.
There's a lot of talking on like TikTok and Reddit and like all these social media platforms of like, I'm sure well-intentioned people that like, even just like maybe the wording of what they're saying could be a little off. Like, if you do this, that, and the other thing, you have ADHD. Is there a way to kind of get a good sense of what information is actually helpful to someone or even just like reliable?
There's not necessarily anything wrong with, you know, seeing a TikTok that's saying, you know, oh, you procrastinate a lot and you drink way too much water and then forget to eat all day, you might have ADHD. I think something like that can be helpful, at least in potentially guiding you down the right path. And, you know, a lot of symptoms of many different things overlap in many ways that could help lead you to a more accurate diagnosis for yourself. I do think there's a little bit of harm in the things that, you know, definitively say, oh, you have these symptoms, you have this. Like, you cannot treat some random person on TikTok as your psychologist. And at some point, it really does become a balance of, you know, if you have access to a medical professional who can help you, that helps a lot. If you have access to information from the DSM, for example, that's really helpful. And then just other research, other medical websites from, you know, trusted institutions. And at some point also something that, you know, is super helpful is just talking to other people who also share your identity and just talking about your shared experiences. And at some level, I find that to be the most helpful source in understanding yourself and in finding the resources that you need and finding what will help for you.
I now invite you on this journey with me to come take a look at maybe some options for self-accommodation with my dyslexic brain.
Okay, oh, recently I installed a Chrome extension that I learned about that is supposed to help dyslexic folks. It's called Half Bold. I'm turning it on now. Turning it on now. I'm turning it on now. What is the point of this extension if it's not going to help me read the International Association for Dyslexia website better? Classroom. Well, I'm not in a classroom anymore now, am I? Allow me to get more specific. Let's try this again. There we go. It says I'm highly intuitive. I would say a fair amount of these describe me pretty well. This one in particular, but not all of this. From what I know about ADHD, it seems like a lot of what they're describing here overlaps with that. Well, there you have it, folks. What is relevant to me right now? So in some ways, seeing that like these are like common accommodations for dyslexic folks, you know, makes me realize that like I did land in a pretty good career where this stuff doesn't seem relevant to me, but also I'm having a hard time finding things that are relevant to me. Okay, I'm just trying to think. What do I remember ever helping me? In particular, I remember in elementary school, they would give these like highlighter things. It wasn't a highlighter, it was like, it looked like a bookmark, and it had like a thin strip of like a yellow, a transparent yellow thing that you're supposed to like put on the page of the book, and it'll kind of help you identify just line by line so your eyes aren't darting around. I remember that helping quite a bit, and you know, honestly, maybe because those were readily available in elementary school, that's one of the reasons that I got missed, because I actually did have a tool back then. I don't remember them past like 4th or 5th grade. Definitely not in middle school, and absolutely never in high school or in college. So it's like they literally stopped being in classrooms when they were starting to become more relevant to me, when the reading was getting more and more difficult. But I'm wondering if I can like find something like that right now. A guided reading strip. Yeah, that's it. Except that I'm not ordering from f***ing Amazon. $30 for a bundle? What? Why am I getting the impression that these things are really hard to come by and only are sold in bulk? I just need one. I mean, like, happy Pride and everything, but I think these only work if the rainbow colors are transparent. You're telling me that like 5% of the US population, I mean, I've seen statistics that say more than 5%, but for conservatively, you're telling me that 5% of the US population experiences dyslexia, and this is not a more readily available thing to help people read, when this was like, at least for me, the most effective thing that I had. For something that impacts like this much of the population, I was expecting a lot more than just tools that are most readily available in bulk on teacher websites and like just school accommodations and more workplace accommodations than just having someone read something out loud to you. If I switch gears, if I end up working somewhere where reading is a little more necessary, it's like, it feels weird saying this, but you know, just for the sake of just being totally clear, like, I don't feel dyslexic enough to need an accommodation like somebody following me around being able to read out loud things that I can internalize that way instead. Is that weird to say? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I feel weird. Let's not do this anymore. Not only is it a little discouraging not being able to find, you know, more clearly defined ways that I can work around the challenges of being dyslexic, but it also kind of paints a picture of this person, for complete and total lack of better words, is more dyslexic than I. It all leads to me feeling like that dyslexia is not disabling me in my life right now, and it makes me question, especially since I am self-diagnosed. It makes me question, like, do I deserve the label of dyslexic? Do I deserve the label of disabled? Like, how do I reconcile those labels, I guess?
Maybe one thing to put this into perspective is there's this concept of the social model of disability. On some level, there are plenty of aspects of disability that would be disabling kind of no matter what for a person. So for example, if you're autistic and you have some intense sensory sensitivities, for example, to bright light, even if the world was, a utopia, we would still have the sun. So you're still kind of going to have to navigate the world through a lens of disability. But there are structures of society in our built environment that can make a disability more or less disabling, for lack of a better word. And our experience of the disability can very much be in flux. It really does depend on your life situation, on the resources you have. Just because you are in a position now where you don't necessarily feel the impact of disability doesn't mean that you didn't or wouldn't have felt that in the past or in a different situation. So now that you are using this label of dyslexia, what are your goals now that you know this about yourself?
I think we all have, we all have to take responsibility over ourselves. But there was a time where that responsibility for me was rooted in messages like, you're stupid, you're not trying hard enough, you need to be more like this. And I think my ultimate goal is to flip that responsibility to I need to understand my brain and do things as much as I can and get myself in situations as much as I can, communicate to people as much as I can the ways that my brain is going to thrive. I don't want this to be a reason that I give up on something. I want it to guide me to find a different way to do it. What do you think the emotional value is of just not only understanding this part of yourself, but now having a word to define it?
When you have a label for what you've experienced your whole life, that can be incredibly relieving. Sometimes it feels difficult to grapple with a label. There are lots of loaded connotations because a lot of people have historically viewed these things as more negative. It can be hard to parse those feelings from the label and from your identity. But I think on some level, regardless of how you feel about the particular label, it really does give you permission to just be without guilt. We're really starting to see so many wonderful communities build out of these things. And people are really bonding over shared labels and shared identities. That leads to change. That leads to change in the way that things currently are. It leads to advocacy. It leads to people being seen and heard. I think things like that will eventually lead us towards a more equitable world. What doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot when learning these things about yourself is that there is a bit of a grieving process. And then when you kind of accept your identity, there can be a lot of mixed emotions of kind of feeling upset that, maybe you won't be able to do some of the things that you thought that you would do with yourself. On the flip side, you might also feel a lot of anger at the fact that, you've gone this long without knowing, that no one was able to help you. It can take a long time to work through. I know that I found it helpful to talk to other people. And I think there's nothing wrong with getting out that grief and that anger and the complicated emotions. As hard as it is, as complicated as it is, no matter what, learning more about yourself, I think, really does help down the line. And once you can get through that hurdle and start on the path of self-forgiveness and self-actualization, then it can really start to become a beautiful thing.
Thanks for talking to me about this, babe.
This was nice. I'm exhausted. I don't know how you do this.
I don't either.
I feel like this was kind of a nothing video in some ways. I didn't get diagnosed. I kind of learned about some of the tools that could help me be a stronger reader, but I have no real evidence that they've changed my relationship to reading or just changed me as a person trying to navigate the world with a brain that works a little differently. But if it's one thing I've learned through educating myself, accommodating myself where I can, and embracing the ways I know my brain thrives, it's not how to read more effectively. It's self-forgiveness. Forgiving myself for all the ways I felt like there was something wrong with me my whole life, like a lack of responsibility or effort or intelligence, when really it was just not being in the right environment sometimes for my brain to work at its full potential. Coming out the other side of self-forgiveness is a renewed relationship with how I process the world, a clearer understanding of how to take ownership over my brain, and honestly, newfound ways to feel pride within myself. But that doesn't mean that all the unnecessary feelings of inferiority, shame, and abandonment from my past will just dissolve immediately. The more I educate myself on dyslexia, the more I learn about what could have been done but wasn't, the more intense these outward feelings of anger become. That's a story for next time.